Welcome to the deep dive. We're taking a fascinating journey today, plunging headfirst into the world of a remarkable dinosaur, all thanks to a collection of scientific writings we've been digging through.
hmm
But this isn't just your run-of-the-mill fossil story. Get ready for a tale packed with scientific twists, turns, and maybe even a bit of detective work.
Exactly. Today, our focus is squarely on Irritator challengeri. It's a Spinosaurid dinosaur that lived back in the early Cretaceous,
Okay.
so about 113 to 110 million years ago, in what's now Brazil. Think of it as a cousin to the more famous Spinosaurus.
Dinosaurs.
Yeah,
And to help us navigate this, we've got scientific papers covering, well, pretty much everything.
yeah, its discovery, how they figured out what it actually was, its anatomy, the environment.
And we'll get into that whole business with Angatorama, another dinosaur, right? The debate there.
We will.
Yeah.
Our mission really is to unpack what made Irritator unique,
Yeah.
figure out its spot in the family tree, imagine its lifestyle, and definitely cover the story behind its discovery and, well, that name.
Yeah, let's start there. Irritator. It definitely
Mhm.
stands out. What's the story?
Well, the genus name, Irritator, it comes straight from the, let's say, irritation. The frustration felt by the paleontologists.
hmm
When they first got the skull, they found it had been um, pretty heavily damaged and actually altered. Fossil collectors had messed with it to try and increase its value.
Altered. You mean like stuck extra bits on?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
They used loads of plaster and even car body filler to, patch it up, hide the breaks, make it look more complete than it really was.
Mhm.
A kind of prehistoric cover-up job.
Wow. Okay. And the species name, Challengery.
Ah, that's a nice little nod. It's a tribute to Professor Challenger from Arthur Conan Doyle's novels, like The Lost World.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and it connects to another fossil from the area, a pterosaur called Arthrodactylus conandoylii, named after Conan Doyle himself. So kind of a literary theme going on there.
That's a neat connection. Now, you mentioned they figured out what it was, so it wasn't always seen as a Spinosaurid. It had a bit of an identity crisis.
It really did. The fossil beds there are famous for pterosaurs, the flying reptiles.
Right.
So initially, that's what they thought it was, a pterosaur skull. Then later, some thought maybe a Maniraptoran dinosaur. That's the group closer to birds.
Okay.
It actually wasn't until 1996 that everyone agreed, okay, this is a Spinosaurid, a theropod, a meat eater
Mm-hmm.
related to Baryonyx and Spinosaurus. So yeah, quite a journey to its proper classification.
A Spinosaurid. Okay, that clicks.
Mhm.
Related to Spinosaurus. And this plaster business, how did the scientists even figure out it had been tampered with?
Ah, well, modern technology came to the rescue there. CT scans.
Like a medical scan.
Exactly.
Uh,
They let the paleontologists see right through the fossil, revealing all the hidden plaster and filler underneath the surface. It showed just how much repair work, let's call it, had been done. It was apparently quite common with fossils from that area, especially fish fossils, unfortunately. It really highlights the challenges you face studying these things sometimes.
Absolutely. Talk about peeling back the layers, literally. Okay, so we know its real identity now and the slightly complicated backstory. Let's get into Irritator itself. What did it look like? How big was it?
Well, size estimates put it somewhere between 6 and 8 meters long. That's what, 20 to 26 feet?
Okay, decent size.
And maybe weighing around a ton, metric ton, so about 1.1 short tons. Compared to some other Spinosaurids, that actually makes it one of the smaller ones we know.
Still pretty impressive, though. Now, the skull, obviously it was messed with, but what were the key original features?
Even with the front bit missing, what's left shows it had a really long, low, slender snout. Very narrow.
Characteristic of Spinosaurs, right?
Very much so. And the teeth were interesting. They were conical, like sharp cones, and mostly straight.
Mm.
But crucially, they didn't have serrations, those little steak knife edges you see on, say, a T-Rex tooth.
Ah, okay. Smooth edges.
Smooth edges, yeah. And it had this thin crest of bone running along the top midline of the snout, a sagittal crest.
Like a little ridge? What was that for?
The thinking is, it was likely an anchor point for powerful neck muscles.
Ah.
If you're snatching slippery fish and need strong, fast neck movements, that crest would help provide the leverage.
Makes sense.
Also, its nostrils were set quite far back on the skull, way back from the tip of the snout. That's important. We'll come back to that. And it had a solid, bony roof to its mouth, a secondary palate.
Secondary palate. Why is that significant?
Well, think about crocodiles. They have one too. It separates the airway from the mouth, and importantly, it makes the whole skull structure much more rigid.
Right.
So when it's chomping down on something struggling, the skull doesn't twist or flex as much. It adds strength.
Gotcha. And the original specimen, the holotype, despite the damage, It's still important.
Oh, incredibly important. It's actually the most complete Spinosaurid skull ever found, even though it came from a subadult, so not quite fully grown.
Wow. So even with the dodgy repairs, it's a key piece of the puzzle. You mentioned we can guess some things about the rest of its body from relatives.
Yeah, based on relatives like Baryonyx or Spinosaurus, it's reasonable to guess Irritator probably had those enlarged claws on its first finger, the thumb claws.
The big slashing claws.
Those ones. And possibly some kind of sail or ridge running down its back, though we have to stress we don't have direct fossil evidence of a sail specifically for Irritator. It's an inference.
The classic Spinosaur look, potentially. Okay, let's dig a bit deeper into the skull specifics. You said the snout tip was missing. What parts do we have, and what details did they reveal?
Okay, so the preserved part is about 16.5 centimeters tall, 10 centimeters wide.
Right.
Scientists estimate the whole skull would have been maybe 60 centimeters long, so long and narrow.
Right.
It's kind of triangular in cross-section.
Yeah.
The brain case at the back was angled backwards. We've got parts of the premaxillae. Those are the bones right at the front of the upper jaw, and they form the bottom edge of the bony nostril openings. The maxillae, the main upper jaw bones, run below and past the nostrils.
Okay, mapping it out. What about openings and other features on the side?
There's a big oval opening in the side of the maxilla, part of the sinuses. And those nostrils, yeah, definitely oval and set way back. Behind the eye socket, there's a large opening called the lateral temporal fenestra. And in front of the eye socket, another long oval one, the antorbital fenestra.
Lots of holes. Reduces weight. Right.
Reduces weight, yeah, and provides space for muscles. The eye socket itself, the orbit, was deep, wider at the top than the bottom. And there's a bone called the lacrimal that separates the eye socket from that front opening, the antorbital fenestra, at about a 40-degree angle.
So many details. What else stood out on the skull roof or base?
Up top, the prefrontal bones, just above and in front of the eyes, were pretty big and solid. The frontals, just behind them, were smoother, sort of concave on top.
And the crest?
The crest, yeah, formed by the nasal bones running along the snout. That secondary palate we mentioned is really key, separating mouth from nasal cavity, like crocs, very unlike most other theropods. It also had little extra openings on the skull roof, called postnasal fenestrae, and down at the base, towards the back, these long bony processes called bicipterygoid processes.
Okay. And the lower jaw, anything significant there?
The back part of the lower jaw was quite deep. A big bone called the syringular makes up a lot of it. Yep. And there's a fairly large oval opening on the side, the mandibular fenestra.
Right.
And maybe one of the coolest finds, the holotype actually preserved a stapes. That's a tiny little bone from the middle ear.
No way. Those are super delicate.
Exactly. Finding one in a non-bird dinosaur is incredibly rare, a really valuable piece of information.
Amazing. Okay, back to the teeth. Unserrated, conical, any other details?
Yep, straight or maybe just faintly curved, sharp edges, but definitely no serrations. They did have these fine lengthwise grooves or flutes running down them. Yeah, little ridges and valleys. Spinosaurus has them too, but interestingly, Baryonyx, another relative, seems to only have them on one side of the tooth, while Irritator had them on both. The teeth were also pretty circular in cross-section, not flattened like, say, a Carnosaur's tooth. And the enamel, the outer layer, was thin and had this sort of finely wrinkled texture.
Interesting texture. How many teeth are we talking about?
Well, in the preserved part of the upper jaw, there are 9 teeth on each side, plus evidence of a 10th socket. They were set quite deeply into the jaw and pretty widely spaced, especially towards the front.
And size, did they vary?
Oh, yeah. The first couple of preserved ones in the maxilla were the biggest, maybe 3 to 4 centimeters just for the crown. Then they get smaller as you go further back in the jaw.
Great.
And those CT scans, they even showed replacement teeth developing inside the jaw, waiting to erupt. Their roots pointed up towards the top of the skull. It tells us how its dental battery worked.
Fascinating glimpse into its biology. Okay, so that's Irritator. Now let's tackle this Angatorama limi connection. Found in the same place, same time. What's the deal?
Right, so Angatorama limi, it was described literally weeks or months after Irritator in 1996. The original fossil, the holotype for Angatorama, was just the very tip of a snout.
It's just the tip.
Just the tip, found in the same geological layers, the same formation as Irritator. So almost immediately, people started saying, hang on, could this just be the missing front part of the Irritator skull? Or, maybe another individual of the same species. If they are the same, then Irritator, because it was named first, gets priority. That's the rule. There was even talk they could be from the exact same animal.
That would tidy things up. What similarities made people think they were the same?
Well, several things lined up. Both clearly had Spinosaurid features. Those nostrils set way back, the long jaws, the conical unserrated teeth.
Yeah.
Both the Irritator skull fragment and the Angatrauma snout tip look very narrow. The teeth seem similar, transversely round, no serrations. And there's a hint that Angatrauma might have also had the start of that sagittal crest Irritator has.
Sounds plausible.
Well,
But they were given different names initially, so there must have been perceived differences too.
exactly. The Angatrauma snout tip does look maybe a bit more flattened from side to side than you might expect from the Irritator skull. There are also subtle differences in how the bones themselves are preserved, the color, pattern of cracks, that sort of thing. Tooth damage varies too.
Hmm.
And some researchers tried comparing the proportions of the Angatrauma snout to other Spinosaurs, like Baryonyx, and suggested it might point to a slightly larger overall skull size than the known Irritator specimen.
Right, because the Irritator holotype was a subadult.
Possibly, yeah. And there's been debate about specific teeth, like does the third tooth socket in the Irritator maxilla match up with where the Angatrauma snout would begin? Different studies have argued it both ways.
So it's still up in the air, a genuine paleontological puzzle.
Pretty much. The consensus, really, is that we need more fossils. We need material that clearly overlaps between the two. Finds maybe a skull that has both the Irritator part and the Angatrauma snout preserved together, or more isolated bones that match both. Until then, it's hard to say for sure if they're the same genus.
Okay.
They do turn out to be the same genus. Yeah, Irritator is the valid name because it got published first. The rules of nomenclature.
First come, first served. Right, let's switch gears. Diet. What did Irritator eat? What do all these features, the snout, the teeth, tell us about its meals?
Well, right from the start, that long snout and those conical teeth screamed fish eater, or at least partly piscivorous.
Makes intuitive sense.
Yeah, and later studies have backed that up.
Yeah.
The whole jaw setup is actually quite similar to the Indian gharial. You know, that crocodile with the super long, thin
Oh,
snout.
yeah, the really specialized fish eater.
Exactly. Highly piscivorous.
Yep.
So the comparison is pretty strong. Those long, pointy, unserrated teeth are just perfect for grabbing and holding onto slippery, wriggling fish. They're not really built for tearing chunks of flesh like, say, Allosaurus teeth.
Good for gripping, not ripping.
Precisely. And remember that strong secondary palate. And the smaller antorbital fenestra. That reinforces the idea that the skull was built to withstand the stresses of dealing with struggling prey, possibly in the water. Again, similar to crocodilians.
Okay. And the nostrils being set so far back, how does that fit the hunting picture?
Ah, that's likely a key adaptation for hunting in water.
Right.
With the nostrils positioned high up and far back, Irritator could probably keep most of its snout submerged, maybe waiting for fish or holding onto prey underwater, and still be able to breathe easily through the top of his head.
Like a snorkel.
Kinda, yeah. And those strong neck muscles, anchored to the crest, perfect for a lightning-fast sideways snap of the jaws in the water, or quickly pulling its head back with captured prey.
So maybe an ambush predator lurking near the surface.
That's a very plausible scenario. Some research also hints Irritator might have relied more on smell than Spinosaurus. Its nostrils, while retracted, were maybe relatively larger, giving more space for olfactory sensors,
Interesting.
whereas Spinosaurus might have used vision more, or maybe those pressure sensors on its snout tip that crocodiles have for detecting movement in murky water. And that Angatrauma snout. It does show hints of that rosette pattern of interlocking teeth at the very tip, which is another classic feature of fish-eating Spinosaurs.
Okay, so strong evidence for fish. But was it only fish? Or was it more opportunistic?
Probably more opportunistic, yeah.
Yeah.
A generalist feeder on smaller animals seems likely. And we actually have direct smoking gun evidence for this.
Oh, what's that?
An Irritator tooth was found embedded in the neck vertebra of a pterosaur fossil from the same formation.
Wow. It ate pterosaurs.
It certainly did. Now, whether it actively snatched them out of the air or near the water, or perhaps scavenged a dead one, we can't say for sure, but it definitely consumed them.
A dinosaur eating a flying reptile. That's incredible. So what else was on the menu in its neighborhood?
Well, the Romaldo Formation ecosystem was pretty diverse. Besides fish and pterosaurs, there were various crocodiliforms, ancient crocodile relatives, both aquatic and terrestrial types.
Okay.
Maybe it took down smaller juvenile spinosaurs or turtles. There were also some other small to medium-sized dinosaurs around. It positioned spinosaurians like Irritator as likely apex predators within that specific lagoon environment.
Top of the food chain in its patch. I also read something about its jaws being able to do something unusual. like a pelican.
Yeah, that's some more recent research. It suggests the lower jaws might have been able to rotate outwards quite a bit at the front.
Widen its mouth.
Exactly, potentially allowing it to swallow surprisingly large prey whole. Think pelican gulping down a big fish. However, that same research also suggested that while the bite might have been fast, it probably wasn't super powerful, not bone-crushing.
Quick snap, big gulp, but not a crusher.
Something like that. And it likely had good binocular vision looking forwards and tended to hold its snout angled slightly downwards.
That paints a really vivid picture of its hunting style. Now, all this talk of hunting in water, just how aquatic was Irritator? Was it truly semi-aquatic?
The evidence definitely points that way, yeah. Living that semi-aquatic life, focusing on aquatic prey in these coastal lagoons, would have been a smart move.
How so?
Well, it likely reduced competition with other big theropods that were more specialized for hunting on land. It seems the Spinosaurid group, Irritator's branch of the family, was generally more adapted to water than their baryonychine cousins.
What specific adaptations point to that watery lifestyle?
Okay, remember those frontal bones on top of the skull? They were arched, concave on top, and narrowed towards the front. This shape would have naturally positioned the eyes a bit higher up on the head than in many other theropods.
So it could peek above the waterline?
Exactly. Like a crocodile or hippo. It could keep watch above the surface while most of its body was submerged. That combination of the broad lower jaw and the narrowed frontals meant its eye sockets faced forwards and upwards, great for scanning ahead and above while in the water.
Clever design. What about the rest of the skeleton? Any clues in the bones themselves?
There is, actually. A fragment of a tibia, a lower leg bone, found in the Romaldo Formation, which might belong to Irritator or a very close relative, shows signs of osteosclerosis.
Osteosclerosis, meaning?
Unusually dense bone, really heavy bones. We see the same thing, even more developed, in Spinosaurus.
And why have dense bones?
The idea is it acts like a diver's weight belt. It helps counteract buoyancy and makes it easier to submerge and stay underwater.
Ah, okay. Ballast.
Exactly. Finding it in a potentially earlier Spinosaurian like this suggests dense bones might have evolved in this lineage before Spinosaurus. Although it's fair to say scientists still debate exactly how important osteosclerosis was versus other factors for controlling buoyancy. It's not fully settled.
Okay, so denser bones maybe helped it sink, but the full picture's still developing. Let's move inside the skull senses and brain. What did those CT scans tell us about Irritator's brain power or sensory world?
They give us some really cool glimpses. They showed elongated olfactory tracts, which suggests, yeah, it probably had a pretty decent sense of smell.
Useful for finding prey, maybe?
Could be. And they also revealed relatively large floccular recesses in the brain case.
Floccular recesses. What part of the brain is that?
The flocculus. It's part of the cerebellum, and it's heavily involved in coordinating eye movements with head and body movements. Think balance and stabilizing your gaze.
Ah, important for a predator.
Extremely important if you're trying to snatch fast-moving prey, especially coordinating head movements. Having an enlarged flocculus suggests Irritator was good at making quick, precise head strikes and keeping its eyes locked onto a target.
Makes sense for fishing?
Absolutely. And the structure of its inner ear, the vestibular system, also points to an ability for fast head movements and reinforces that idea of holding its snout angled downwards, which would give it clear binocular vision straight ahead.
So excellent coordination for nabbing dinner. What about hearing? Any idea what its world sounded like?
Well, based on the inner ear structures, scientists estimate its hearing range was probably somewhere between 350 and 3,550 hertz.
How does that compare?
It puts it comfortably within the range of modern birds, actually. Maybe a bit better at higher frequencies than crocodiles typically hear.
Fascinating to try and imagine that soundscape. Okay, let's zoom out. Where exactly did Irritator live? What was its environment, its paleoecology like?
So we're in the Applian stage, early Cretaceous, around 110 million years ago, northeastern Brazil. The specific rock layer, the Romaldo Formation, represents what we think was a coastal lagoon.
A lagoon, so saltwater, freshwater.
Probably brackish, mostly. A mix. It likely had connections to the open ocean, so sea levels might have fluctuated. And there would have been fresh water flowing in from rivers, too. The climate was tropical, warm, and humid, like Brazil today. But the surrounding land might have been drier, maybe arid or semi-arid, with plants adapted to those conditions.
A tropical lagoon next to a drier landscape. Who else lived there? Who were Irritator's neighbors?
Oh, it was a bustling place. Lots of pterosaurs, really diverse famous ones like Anhanguera, Tapejara. Other dinosaurs, too, though mostly smaller theropods like Santanaraptor and Mauritia.
Any big plant eaters?
Interestingly, not many large herbivores seem to be found in this specific formation. That might suggest vegetation wasn't super abundant, perhaps. But
Maybe.
lots of other creatures, various crocodiliforms, turtles like Brasilames, and of course, tons and tons of fish. A very rich aquatic fauna.
Wow. With so many predators around, especially fish eaters, how did they all get along? Must have been crowded.
Yeah, that's a good point. The thinking is there must have been some kind of niche partitioning. Different predators probably specialized in slightly different things, maybe different sizes of fish, or hunting in different parts of the lagoon, shallow versus deeper water, or near the shore versus further out. That would reduce direct competition for the same food.
Makes sense. And looking even wider geographically, where did Irritator fit into the global picture of Spinosaurids?
Well, Spinosaurs as a whole were pretty widespread by the early Cretaceous finds in Europe, Africa, Asia, South America.
A global family.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
There's a theory that maybe the two main subfamilies evolved separately at first.
Well,
The Baryonycines, like Baryonyx, perhaps more in the north, Laurasia, Europe, and the Spinosauremes, Irritator Spinosaurus, more in the south, Gondwana, Africa.
okay.
And then maybe the Spinosaurians spread from Africa into South America as the Atlantic Ocean started opening up between the continents. But honestly, the exact routes and timing are still debated. New finds keep adding complexity to the picture. It's not a simple north-south split anymore.
Right, the story's always evolving with new discoveries. Now, thinking about the fossil itself, the holotype, how it was found, does that tell us anything about what happened after Irritator died? The taphonomy?
It does offer some clues.
Hmm.
The holotype skeleton was found lying on its side. It seems some bones, especially from the back of the skull and lower jaws, were lost or shifted around before it got buried and fossilized.
Okay.
There's always a question with fossils like this. Did the animal die right there, or did the carcass get washed in from somewhere else?
All right.
In Irritator's case, the fact the lower jaw was still articulated, still connected to the skull, and also the presence of that potential osteosclerosis, the dense bone.
Which would make it sink.
Exactly. Those things suggest it probably sank and was buried relatively quickly in its natural habitat, the lagoon, rather than being transported a long distance after death.
So it likely died and settled near where it lived.
Okay, let's try and pull all this together. We've covered a lot of ground. What are the main takeaways from our deep dive into Irritator Challengery? Well, Irritator was clearly a really unique dinosaur, a medium-sized Spinosaurid from Brazil, early Cretaceous. Its skull, despite the enhancements, is incredibly important, the best Spinosaurid skull we have.
Yeah.
Its name tells a story about the frustrations and challenges of paleontology. Its anatomy strongly points to a life spent at least partly in and around water, likely eating fish, but also being opportunistic. Remember that pterosaur snack.
Can't forget that.
And it had these fascinating adaptations, the skull shape, the dense bones, the sensory capability suggested by the brain case. The whole Angatorama question also highlights how science works. Ideas get proposed, debated, refined as new evidence comes in. It's dynamic.
Absolutely fascinating, and it really leaves you wondering, doesn't it? With all this evidence for both land and water adaptations, you have to ask, how exactly did Irritator split its time? How different were its hunting strategies depending on whether it was stalking the shoreline versus lurking in the lagoon itself? That's definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.